Hey, let's get into this. So here's basically what you need to know. I gotta shut the button off. Oh God. No. Oh, that one does it. All right. So here we go. There's something wrong with the pads on this device. So here's what you need to know. There is a rule, okay, that basically says that if you move out of state, right, if you go ahead and leave the state while receiving food stamps, that at the end of the day, they will continue to pay food stamps for a period of time. And it's kind of up to the states with its practical application aspect as to when they really start to check in on whether or not you've come back to the state. And so what's interesting is that a lot of people don't realize this, but your SNAP card, which is why a lot of people take all the money off and then just spend the money, but your SNAP card, your EBT card, your food stamp card has basically constant revolving checks on it. Every time you buy something, every time you do something, every time you do this, or whatever, right? If you can go ahead and find a way to get the funds off, which you're not always supposed to do, then what happens is it's one of those situations where people are finding a way to move out of the state to go do work while still receiving food stamps from the original state that they stayed in. And then they try to apply for other things while they're in the new state. Now, some of you are thinking, well, sure, people should be allowed to have a 30-day, a 60-day, a 90-day, although that's a lot, time where they're allowed to go out of the state. Now, to be fair, if you go out of the state for a holiday, if you go out of the state for, a mini job, if you go out of the state for a short period, let's say 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that would be reasonable because you would expect it that the person should be able to go ahead and move out of the state. But, at the end of the day, the problem is that some of these states, I'm not going to say which ones, actually I am, I'm going to give you the full list of what each state does. Some of these states give you an obnoxiously large amount of time to stay out of the state and continue to receive food stamps. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and go too deep into this because I have to get to work and do the law firm stuff during the day. But here's kind of the basic thing of what you need to know about this situation. All right. So certain states don't actually have a specific timeline as to how long you can be out of the state. So, for example, Alabama has, for the threshold for presumption of change, where you're changing states, it is intent-based, and it follows the federal rules. And EBT monitoring, where they watch what you spend from your card for extended use, if you're basically spending the money somewhere else. So let's say you move from state A to state B and you start spending money and they notice that all the money you're spending is in state B, it's going to ring a red bell. Now, you're supposed to report changes, notify, right, within 10 days of what's going on as a food stamp recipient. Alaska, another state, there's no threshold for presumption of you changing states, but it allows for temporary absences. Basically, if you wanted to go ahead, and it says specifically for subsistence, hunting, fishing, case review after 6+ months of out-of-state use. So the thing is, these states don't really have a really hard and fast rule as to how long you can be out of the state, which means that people can move out of the state, not have people recognize them, do a job under the table, and then come back, and they could do this for months. Another thing, Arizona. Now, Arizona, for the threshold for the presumption of change, has a 90-day restriction. So the presumption after 90 days basically is that, you were essentially gone for 90 days, and therefore the food stamps will be cut off because you were being in some other state. Arkansas does not have a presumption of changing states. Basically requires or focuses on you actually reporting that you are moving states. Now, basically, if they send out a letter and you don't respond, they're going to close your benefits. Now, here's the big kicker one. We've made it down to California. California, just to be clear, has a one whole year, okay, threshold for presumption of change when it comes to moving out of the state. Now, that's interesting because people move into the state of California and then can move out of the state of California. And still, if they're not, telling California that they intended to move, that they intended to go somewhere else for an entire year. The food stamps are still on for that person. So they could go somewhere else and potentially, find a way to set up, although it would be illegal, they could find a way to set up, food stamps in another state. They had a lot of those people. They'll grab some other social security number, some other name, and they'll start playing the game. But the bottom line is California has, after 1 year, a presumption of new residency. Then the benefits become discontinued without a notice, and you don't really get to do, you can always rebut it and say, no, I'm actually here. But, it's one of those things where like you shoulda, coulda, woulda interacted with them. Now, technically, they're supposed to be watching how you spend money, but their presumption is that you have up into an entire year to basically be somewhere else and then go ahead and come back and still continue to receive your food stamp benefits. Now, the problem with this is that if you said to a California worker, and they would get a little pissed, to be fair. They would get very pissed if they knew that they were paying for people to receive food stamps from the state while they were in a totally different state. A lot of the California workers would be super pissed if they knew that. Now, let's go to another blue state, Colorado. There's no specified timeline, so they follow federal guidance. Verification required for absences that are greater than 3 months is the usual what they use there, okay? So, they also have homeless and homestead exemptions, but the bottom line is that, just to be fair with this, they're not really checking aggressively whether or not you moved out of the state. And that's one of the things where people who know how to fraud the system really can fraud the system. Now, if Trump were aware of this or, doing more with this, he would have more aggressively restricted out-of-state use. If you were out of the state for, let's say, 30 days, if you were out of the state for, let's say, 60 days in one period of time, food stamps would be automatically cut off unless you submitted, and they send out a document, usually if they're questioning it, here, what's, last known address, what's going on, unless you submitted, like you had to submit some sort of heads up to, the SNAP office as to what was going on, where you're at, et cetera, et cetera. And so what's interesting about this is that, some people will argue the other side of it, which is that, okay, well, what if you go homeless and the only place you can go is to another state where you have family? Well, then the expectation is that you would change your food stamps to that new state, right? And I know what you guys are thinking. The Californians, they don't actually pay for food stamps. Oh, but they do. While the federal government does pay for food stamps, the states pay 50% of the administration fee. So while there's the big money, the food stamps that actually get paid to everybody, then half the Fed government and half the states pay the administration, the personnel, the people that actually do all of the sending of the money out functions. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize if they haven't had a lot of corporate jobs or interact with corporate settings. There's always a heavy cost to do the thing that's supposed to be free with the government. And that's because you need a lot of personnel to do it, and you need competent personnel to consistently do it. If you don't get competent personnel, you're not going to end up with a, food stamp check, or well, in this case, food stamp card with the money going to the proper card. So yeah, absolutely. Each one of these workers in these states would be very pissed to learn that people could totally move out of the state, continue to receive food stamps, and it would still have a food stamp payment going to them. So my question to you is, as I go through these states, and I'm curious about this, what do you feel is a reasonable time for a person to go ahead and receive food stamps? Just to clarify, what do you feel a person receiving food stamps should be able to do with leaving the state and not telling the state that they've left the state? Because this is a huge area of fraud that Trump didn't catch. If he had caught this would have been changed in the big, beautiful bill to something else, right? So what do you feel? Do you feel like it should be 90 days? To me, 90 days is a long period of time. It really is. I don't disagree with 60 days because you might need medical treatment in another place. And the medical treatment for therapy might take more than 30 days. It's unlikely, but it might. It might take more than 30 days. So maybe 45 days, maybe 60 days, something like that. I don't think 90 days is appropriate. At that point, they can move therapy to a different location. or if you have to go back for further stuff, you could basically, just travel there and come back. So I guess for me, I'm leaning towards more of the 45 days to 60 days allowance. I do not think 1 year, like what California has, is acceptable. In fact, it's almost designed to create a system for fraud in California to be done. So to me, I think at the end of the day, and the reason I say this to you is that I want people to get their food stamps. I want food stamps to be worth more. I mean, I have a lot of people that I know that work at jobs that don't pay them much at all, but they also don't get a check. You know what I mean? Like a lot of them don't get a disability check, a veterans check, a workers' comp check, a LTD check, a retirement check. They don't get anything. So they got to go work, and they work at, whatever, Walmart, and Walmart won't give them full hours because they like to have lots of people hungry for hours. So I get it. You know what I mean? And then they take their food stamps and they spend them at Walmart, which is where they work, to go ahead and exist. So I get it. But I guess what I would say is this. I guess from my perspective, when it comes to food stamps, moving out of the state and being able to stay out of the state for a whole year, that to me is just a great opening for fraud. That to me is a great opening. Now, at the same time, food stamps aren't enough. Okay. The people arguing that we need, food stamps and we shouldn't release the lists of food stamps and blah, 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 blah. Those are the groups, the Democrat-oriented groups, that have massive fraud. And it's obnoxious because you're basically telling the middle class who works their ass off every day that they can go suck a bean somewhere because they're going to keep doing fraud. They're going to keep doing their agenda at the cost of the health of the working class that they borrow and steal against. So from my perspective, we should look at, should food stamps be more per person? But we need to obviously focus on, and they've been doing this a lot. All the red states already, submitted their list, but we need to go ahead and look at who's actually receiving these food stamps. Because if you sit back and think about it, and you go to okay, what is the core group that should be receiving food stamps? You could take that core group, and if you get rid of all the fraud, right, all the other people that could potentially do some work and if you get rid of all of that, right, the Somalis, you get rid of all the massive cultural, fraud abuse stuff that's going on. If you get rid of that, you could then increase how much the real recipients should receive. And you could increase it significantly because the amount of people who are on food stamps that really shouldn't be on food stamps, it's a high number. It's not a low number. So that's kind of the problem that I foresee with this situation. All right, let's keep going through this. Connecticut, you get 60 days, EBT match flags after 60 days, 10-day response window, or case closure. They pull the benefits, which is surprising because, Connecticut, albeit it is a no shenanigans state, it is a very, very blue state. Delaware, they do not have a specified specific threshold for presumption of changing states. They basically align with the feds, monitors for 3+ months of out-of-state transactions. And that's their main thing here. They're not like, their main thing that they look for is, are you spending money? Are you buying food in another state? And, remember too, this is something where a lot of people got caught with this because they would sell their EBT card. Their EBT card would then be, sent somewhere else. And then that other person somewhere else would be buying food. That's why the EBT oriented, people, they knew if they're going to sell their EBT card, that EBT card better be sold specifically to somebody in the area that they're at that's going to use it in the area where they're at. Although I will say this, I don't know why we don't have an EBT system that has facial recognition when they go to use the card. I mean, that should be simple. It's not difficult technology. We have the machines at checkouts at most of these retailers. This shouldn't, they could set up a camera and it links to you, links your face, yada, yada. Now people will say, no, I don't want a digital ID. And I agree, but everybody's being forced onto a digital ID anyways. Not that I'm happy about it. The ID.me, right? That's a digital ID. The whole, using your finger on the computers, using your facial scan with your phones, that's all digital identification, right? It's all there already. Everybody's like, it's going to happen and we can't let it happen. It's already here. It's already here. It's just not as bad as China, where if you say something that the government doesn't like, they can completely destroy your life. Okay. Next one, District of Columbia, not a state, but still important, obviously. They ironically follow what the feds do. Not ironically, they do follow what the feds do. Case by case, report absences that are greater than 30 days. So District of Columbia is saying, hey, within 30 days, you need to tell us what's actually going on. All right, let's go over to Florida. Florida gives you 90 days. Presumption after 90 days must verify basically, ties to the state. There's got to be that connection. Again, I don't think 90 days is an appropriate thing. I think that's going to create a lot of fraud problems. I think that there's a big issue with that. And let's go to Georgia. Georgia has no specified, so they're following federal. So they will close off the EBT benefits if no contact after 60 days. EBT usage review will continuously occur. So basically around 60 days is what we're running into. Guam, federal rules apply. Limited monitoring due to territory status, though, because Guam is obviously a territory, not a state. Although it probably will be an actual state in the not too distant future. We got Hawaii. Hawaii has no threshold for presumption of change. They allow extended absences for cultural travel, review after 6 months. Now, look, I want to say this. Hawaii, I think, is unique. Alaska, I think, is unique because, they're like in their own little spot, their own little zone, their own little area. Like they're their own little thing. So do I think places that are disconnected like that should be a little bit longer? Yeah, I think Hawaii, I think Alaska, I think Guam, I think those should be longer because people should be able to, if on food stamps, travel someplace to go visit somebody else. Although, to be fair, most people would love to travel to Hawaii and not travel out of Hawaii. But again, it is what it is. Idaho. Now, Idaho has 6 months. Presumption after 6 months, rebuttable with evidence of intent. So intent to stay in the state of Idaho. I don't think Idaho needs 6 months where you get to leave the state, go spend money somewhere else. Because think about it. What you could do is, this is the game that they could play. You could go leave the state, go work a job under the table, and then come back after 5 or 6 months. Nobody's going to know who you are. Nobody's going to connect the dots. Nobody's going to report you because you're not in Idaho where you normally live. Other option is you could, and this is a crime. This would be a crime. You could go ahead, and you shouldn't do this. You could go ahead and basically have a situation where you sell your EBT card to somebody in another state, and basically you let them know, okay, well, you have to give me this much money up front, and then I will send you my EBT card, and it goes to another person in another state, and then they use that EBT card for, let's say, 5 months, 6 months, and then they're no longer, and then you just don't send them or sell them your next card. And that could be a way that people get a chunk of money up front, not a huge chunk, but a chunk of money up front for basically their EBT benefits. But that's a crime. You know what I mean? That's a crime. But again, Trump didn't catch this. If he caught this, he would have said, okay, every state gets 45 days except for Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, Alaska, the Virgin Islands, etc. He didn't catch this with the big, beautiful, because this is just, there's lots of fraud that can occur with this. Illinois, basically, let's see. Pretty much, you can have extended stays, cannot dual participate, but you have to go through what your intent is with staying. So Illinois is following some of the federal rules. It's PM 030203-C. Indiana, 90 days. Basically, after 90 days of you spending money out of state from that card, you're going to get a 15-day verification period where you have to basically respond to them. Iowa, no specified threshold for presumption of changing states. So you can stay out of the state. They're saying EBT match after 3 months, closure if you don't basically get back to them, if you are unverified. So they cut off your food stamps after 3 months of being in another state. Kansas, you get 60 days, which they're saying is common for work-related absences. Kentucky, although Kansas has a lot of farm people and they'll basically go do farm work in different places. But again, if you're doing that much work, you know what I mean? Food stamps, yada, yada. Kentucky, review after 4 months. Basically, the thing with Kentucky is it has a lot of migrant workers, has a lot of seasonal workers. So that's the idea with Kentucky. Louisiana, 90 days. So basically, after 90 days, they'll reach out and say, do you live somewhere else now? If you do, they'll cut off benefits. If you say, no, I still live in Louisiana, then they'll say, okay, then why are you in Texas or whatever. Maine allows up to 1 year. Again, the 1 year is just mind-boggling, but allows up to 1 year for medical or education purposes. They do a case review at that point. Now, I can see that. I can see you getting food stamps for a year in another state to get educated in something, maybe a certificate, but not a diploma. But I got to be honest with you, that doesn't make sense to me. You should, if you go to another state where you're going to be getting educated for 6 months, a year, whatever, have to switch your food stamps to that new state. Okay. Now, should they have programs where it's seamless? Should the academia institutions, the schools, set that stuff up to make sure it's seamless? Absolutely. But 1 year and you keep receiving it from one state, and there's a lot of people who sign up for academia in other states, right? They can claim that they go ahead and in Maine, should receive their continuous food stamps. They swap to another state. And then at that point, basically, they could stop doing the academia thing and just do something else. Now, at the same time, I'm all for people doing the work. If they want to go to another state and work, cool. But I don't think a year of just staying on food stamps with one state is the right choice. I think if they're going to go work someplace, there should be a program, a bridge program, if you will, that allows you to move seamlessly, and they do have programs for this, but move more seamlessly to work in other countries and do stuff. So I got to be honest, they need work on this. Maryland, 6 months. Presumption after 6 months is that you've moved out of the state. You got to go ahead and notify to let people know that you're still living in the state, even if you have moved out for 6 months. Massachusetts, 45 days. I would expect Massachusetts to be like another 1 year. But again, Massachusetts tends to be pushed a little bit when it comes to its law based off of what the insurance companies are doing. And insurance companies love their 30 days, 45 days. But basically, out-of-state EBT match, notice after 45 days that you've been spending money in some other state continuously, or you've just been out of the state for whatever reporting purposes. It is an auto closure after 25 days of no response. So basically, it's just before the month mark, they will close you out and not pay you food stamps anymore if you don't respond about why you are out of the state for 45 days or more. Michigan, monitors via basically the NAC. That's the group that looks at what you're spending on your cards. Basically, it's a 3 month plus out-of-state review. That's where they really start digging in and looking. But again, that's up to the states. And if they don't have the personnel to do it, this is one of the things I don't think Trump realizes. If they don't have their staff or the personnel paid to check on whether or not somebody's there or somebody has left or whatever, then that person could have left and still get, their food stamp cards, And so remember, they can set up mail forwarding. They can do all these different things if they need a new card. But for the most part, the money just gets sucked right onto that card. Minnesota, famous for fraud. Very good, very good. Follows federal rules for the most part, but report changes, no fixed threshold, but EBT flags after 90 days. And that's what the interesting thing is about like California, Minnesota. If you get managers of administrative people saying, okay, we're just going to ignore until they get to 6 months, we're going to ignore until they get to 1 year, then that'll become the rule of thumb. That's what will happen. And that tends to happen in places where, the administrators are trying to follow what the rule is. The managers of the administrators have political dreams, and then we end up with, abuse. And that's the sad thing. A lot of people blame the employees of these, food stamp facilities. It's not the employees. It's the managers, the executive personnel. It's the ones that are tied to these politicians who have an agenda. Those are the ones that throw us off track with having a proper food stamp program. Then you have Mississippi. 60 days, presumption after 60 days. It is basically very, very strict for non-migrants. Missouri, verification for absence after 2 months. Montana. Now, Montana, because obviously tribal details, you have Native Americans, things like that. Or you have individuals that if they're super rural, they tend to, So anyways, bottom line is this: flexible for tribal, flexible for rural people. They do a review after 6 months. Certain states like North Dakota and Montana, I can see that reasoning because they are literally, when you say sometimes, in the middle of nowhere. They are in the cheeks of two mountains. They are nobody knows that they're there other than they know they're there, Nebraska, 90 days, flagged after 90 days, 10 days to respond. Nevada, 6 months. Presumption after 6 months aligns with the California for border cases. New Hampshire, it's case by case, but usually 3 months. New Jersey, 60 days. They inquire. If you don't respond to the notice, then it'll be a permanent closure. New Mexico, they have tribal exemptions, but basically 90 days is the usual. New York, basically intent. What was your intent to actually do govern? So like if you intend to move, but you get stuck there, you intend to come back. And if you intend to go there and come back and get stuck there, then in that instance, intent rules. But usually 3 months plus is where they check in to see what's going on with you. North Carolina, 90-day presumption, although migrant flexibility. North Dakota, they review it after 4 months. Oil field workers are often temporary, although I've never really understood why oil field workers would not be given a decent wage. But again, they play the same games with those where they keep everybody hungry for hours. Ohio, 60 days. And then you get a 30-day verification window to say, yes, I'm still an Ohioan, but I'm living right now in another state because of such and such reason. Oklahoma, EBT match after 90 days. That's when they check in with you. Oregon, it's intent-based. Did you intend to move back? No fixed limit. So I could see Oregon, having some fraud there from that. Pennsylvania, presumption is 90 days. Puerto Rico, federal rules are followed. They don't really share much data. Rhode Island, similar to Massachusetts, verification notice after 45 days. South Carolina reviews after 60 days. So if you're outside of the state for 60 days, they'll send out a notice. South Dakota, flexible for reservations, 6-month review. We're getting into like tribal territory, American Indian territory. Tennessee, 60 days, presumption after 60 days that you basically have moved out of the state. That's when they send out the letter. That's where they do the intent letter. Texas, 90 days. And they look for strict enforcement with Texas. Utah, they'll flag after 3 months of being outside of the state. Vermont, case by case, allows 1 year for seasonal work. I feel like 1 year is too much. I don't know. I just feel like 1 year is an abuse. If Trump actually knew about this, he would have changed how it works in the big, beautiful bill and made it federal across the land as to what your amount of time allowed is. And then he would have somehow pushed the states to have to follow. And then there would have been a battle over that. But point is, 1 year is just, and I get it. There's not unlimited jobs in Vermont. I get that. But at the same time, like if you find work somewhere else, if you have to go to work somewhere else and it's not right on the border, you're going to have to live somewhere else. Granted, there are people that will, go on a bus for 3 hours every day to get there and come back. And then there's extraordinary stories of people who will travel 6 hours to get there and come back every day. But to be very clear, that is not reality. Virgin Islands, federal alignment, minimal monitoring. Virginia, presumption is you've moved out of the state after 60 days. Washington, any length of time is okay. If living in Washington, so basically temporary absences are allowed, but it's about intent to return. Washington is like a hyper liberal state. Like California is very liberal, but like the wokest woke would probably, I don't know, you let me know. I think the wokest woke state would be Washington. So their main thing is it's about intent, and pretty much any length of time is okay if living in Washington at application point, right? You apply when you were in Washington, the state, and then you can just go somewhere else. And I mean, that's just, there's so many ways that they could fraud that. But again, Washington is a hyper woke state. So, to me, it's not surprising that they would have an even more ridiculous rule on how you can receive food stamps from Washington state recipients paying for half the administration of them while you're living in Florida. You know what I mean? Like that to me is just, I don't know. It's just ridiculous. Although I'm sure they check, and I'm sure at some point, I'm sure there's a limit. It's just their thing is basically as long as you begin the application, you can flutter around. And remember, there's not a lot of opportunities in, like Washington State is not like Florida. Florida, there's all kinds of jobs popping up all the time. There's all kinds of opportunities popping up all the time. In Florida, if you need a job within 5 minutes, there's somebody that needs you to mow a lawn. There's somebody that needs you to take care of a pepper tree. There's somebody that needs you to do something with a shovel. There's some construction site. There's some admin function job. There's just jobs. There's so many jobs. Okay. A lot of people are like, I can't find a job. I get it. But, not wanting to work a landscaping job, not wanting to work a tree, a tree surgeon job, not wanting to, work those types of jobs. I get it. I totally get it. But there's always jobs available in Florida. People are always looking for people to work them. All right, West Virginia, 90 days. And back to that Florida notation, some people be like, no, there's not. There's absolutely no. You just have to move to a different county. And I know that's really tough when you're only on food stamps. Or you may be getting your check from Washington, but you got to move to the counties that are massively growing. If you're in a county that's hyper restricted and they can't build new stuff, and there's all these restrictions. If you're in a blue area, there's not a lot of new jobs because everything's restricted, everything's set up, and there's not a lot of money that can go into stuff because the problem is there's too many permits to start new stuff. And people are they don't have the money. They don't have expendable cash in the blue areas. If you go to the red areas, there's always somebody who needs something done. There's a lot of retired people, elderly people, older people in Florida. You go to a blue area, you just, basically, seek job options, look on Facebook Marketplace. There's always something that pops up that somebody needs done. Okay. No, there's not. Yeah. Well, just to be fair, immigrants that would wait at Home Depot to be picked up every day for any potential job, they magically somehow kept getting work almost every single day for many of them. I mean, some of them were in Home Depots maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. But I know a lot of people in a lot of Home Depots where people are getting picked up every day for work. All right, next one. West Virginia, 90 days. You get flagged after 90 days of being out of the state. They're focused on, rural areas, though, maybe having exceptions. Wisconsin, 6 months. They have, which is a lot. Presumption after 6 months that you've moved out of the state and shouldn't be receiving a food stamp card anymore. Wyoming, 4 months. And then there's energy sector flexibility because obviously they want to make sure people are doing their work. Now, there's lots of ways, just to be really clear on this thing, that at the end of the day, the government is trying to restrict fraud and abuse. But the problem we run into with multi-food stamp, and remember, a lot of you are thinking like, oh, somebody else will get one extra food stamp card, one extra this, one extra that, or there'll be a mix-up in the system and they'll get two from the same state or whatever. That's not the level of fraud I'm really worried about with this. The level of fraud I'm worried about are these like Nigerians who come here, who basically will go ahead and set up a massive multi-million-dollar, food stamp fraud system where they'll buy social security numbers from some worker at the SSA, and then they'll create mass accounts of food stamps to receive tons of cards and then be able to buy or they'll basically switch the funds from the card to something else, or they'll sell the cards or do that. They'll have a business in it. And then all of a sudden, in a couple of years, you're at millions of dollars lost that should have gone to actual impoverished people that live in America. That's my real main concern with this, because there's always like that guy. In fact, yesterday I was supposed to go live and do a video on that guy who is famous, who might have stolen from you. He was that efficient at doing it. But at the end of the day, last night I was just too tired to actually do it. So bottom line is this. I want to know what you guys feel should be an acceptable amount. The Republicans kind of messed up. They missed this whole thing. And remember, the new thing is that in 2017, there was a farm bill that mandates that states share data through the NAC and the Income Eligibility Verification System, the IEVS, because they're trying to prevent dual enrollment. But a lot of you guys don't realize, like the systems, the actual programs to be put in place were not nationwide until after 2017, when it was demanded by the federal government to get on this, because people were getting double food stamps in many situations. And, the other side of the coin is now they're looking much more heavily at the W-2s. IRS is looking at who's been hired, who's doing what. because they want people to work off of food stamps. Like, the goal is not to have more people on food stamps. Although I heard, I heard a Democrat pushing that agenda, and I was just sitting there and I looked at the person next to me like, how can this person be? Because remember, the point is not to have people on food stamps unless they have young kids, unless they are disabled, unless they're elderly and can't really work as much anymore. They've been abusing the whole, asylum refugee traffic thing. But there are individuals who are, immigrants who essentially should have a food stamp card. They absolutely should have it. Although there's been a lot of abuse in that arena. But my point to you is there were so many people from COVID that were like, yeah, I'm just going to get food stamps and play video games. And it was horrible. And I would see it all the time. Like when I go work with somebody at their house and be like filling out forms or whatever, I'm telling you, like, the kid was totally capable of going and working a job, 100% capable of going and working a job. It's just, food stamps. And I was just sitting there. I was just like, man, now I'm all for the person getting food stamps while they work their way out of poverty. And I think the government should be, when it comes to like mega corporations like Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever. And I'm not sure what Home Depot's doing, or Lowe's, but I know Walmart plays the game. And the game is very simple. What they do is they get as many people to apply, and they will accept a lot of those people, but they're only going to give them limited hours so that they can't actually survive on the money they get. And so they go on food stamps. And that's how Walmart works it out, is that those people then get subsidized by the federal government to work for Walmart. And then when they get subsidized with those food stamps, Walmart knows, because they work there, they're going to go spend their food stamps at the Walmart. So Walmart knows they can get subsidized from SNAP and make a lot of money off of basically those food stamps, buying all of those products. I don't think we should have a system like that. I don't think it's good. Now, at the same time, we switch it, Walmart's going to raise its prices. But I think I think, to be fair, these grocery stores especially have been abusing things since COVID, and they just never really stopped. They've had these record profits, massive profits, record profits. And to me, it's just like, at some point, somebody needs to step in and like make it make sense for the employees, because we don't want people working for Walmart that are constantly so starved to the point where they can't afford stuff, where they have to get food stamps. We want them on food stamps to begin with. Then they work their way up to full time, stuff like that. Because, Walmart's a corporation where they could make people full timers. They don't have to be part time. They could make people full timers. But, again, it is the way it works. Walmart is fully aware of it. Their corporate existence is fully aware of the game that they play. Nobody is stopping them because, it's the Walton family, and, it is what it is. If you try to stop them, they're going to go ahead and pay for somebody else to sit in a seat. That's not going to change the law. It's not. It's just, that's how it works. Politics are based off of which rich group didn't pay their fair share to the politician. Because when they don't pay their fair share to the politician, that's when rules and laws start creeping out that affect that rich person's ability to make more money, play the game, get subsidized by the federal government, etc. Don't think I don't know the farmers play that game too. I'm fully aware of that as well. All right, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and walk the doggies again. I do have a hearing in the not too distant future, so I'm going to walk the dogs, come back. I think I have enough time for a quick video, and then basically it's law firm work for the rest of the day. I will, because it is Thursday, really try to go live tonight. I keep falling asleep because it's just the work here is very difficult because it's 20 to 30 degrees outside and it's on the farm. So it's just a little rough. Anyways, I'll catch you a little bit later. We'll rock and roll, and I will catch you soon once I walk the doggies. Thank you so much, everybody. Please remember to like and subscribe. Hit that like button. Some of you don't hit the like button. Also, keep in mind, I am catching up on all the private sessions. People hire me for a 30-minute, 60-minute private session. I have a couple more of those. So if I haven't called you yet, I will schedule those over today or tomorrow. I'll catch you later. Have a wonderful day, and we'll rock and roll from there. Attorney Walter Hnot, thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.